What if I told you that the moment you've been waiting for, that big spiritual breakthrough, that sudden clarity about your purpose, already happened and you just didn't recognize it? I know that sounds strange. You're probably thinking, no way, I definitely know if I had a spiritual awakening. But here's the thing, it doesn't show up the way we've been taught to expect. There's no angelic chorus, no mystical experience that changes everything in a flash. Actually, it's way more mundane than that, and honestly, that's exactly why most people miss it completely. It usually starts on a random weekday. You're making coffee, scrolling through your phone, getting ready for work. The same routine you've done 1,000 times, but then something feels off. Not bad, just different, like you're watching yourself go through the motions, and for the first time you're actually aware that you're watching. Has this ever happened to you? But before we go deeper into this, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. So this weird moment of self-observation, psychologists have a fancy term for it: metacognition. Basically, you're thinking about your thinking. But the mystics and ancient wisdom keepers, they called it the soul, waking up to itself. And once that happens, even just a tiny bit, you can't go back to full autopilot anymore. The crack is there. Now here's what pisses me off about most manifestation content out there, and stay with me because this is crucial. Everyone's teaching it backwards. They're telling you to visualize your dream life, make vision boards, repeat affirmations in the mirror, and basically beg the universe really hard for what you want. And then, when it doesn't work, they say you weren't vibrating high enough or you had limiting beliefs blocking you. But that's not how this actually works. Real manifestation, the kind that fundamentally shifts your reality, isn't about wanting something so desperately that the cosmos finally gives in. It's not about convincing anyone or anything. It's about something that sounds simple, but is actually incredibly challenging. You have to become the person who already has what you're asking for. Not fake it, not act like it, actually embody that. State so completely that reality literally cannot reflect anything else back to you. Think about your life right now. Every single thing in it, your relationships, your bank account, your job, your health, your daily experiences, all of it is showing you exactly who you are being, not who you want to be. And what you're about to discover is why that distinction matters more than anything else you've learned about manifestation. Because once you understand this, once you really get how the mirror works, the thing is, your mind is really good at lying to you. It's excellent at rationalization, at making excuses, at building elaborate stories about why things are the way they are. But your body never lies. It can't. It doesn't have that capability. Let me give you an example. There was this woman, Maya, who had what looked like a perfect life on paper. Good job, nice apartment, stable relationships. But she kept waking up exhausted. This deep fatigue that no amount of sleep could fix. One day, while cleaning out a drawer, she found an old journal from her teenage years. First page, written in that passionate handwriting you only have when you're young and still believe everything is possible. I want my life to be a message. The moment she read those words, her chest tightened, like someone had wrapped a band around her ribs. Then, almost immediately, it released and expanded. She started crying and had no idea why. Her mind tried to dismiss it, just nostalgia, just sentimentality about being young. But that physical response, that contraction, followed by expansion, was her body screaming the truth that her mind had been successfully ignoring for years. She wasn't living authentically. She'd built a life that looked good, but felt hollow. Your body is constantly giving you this kind of feedback. When someone asks you to do something and you immediately feel your stomach clench, that's data. When you think about a certain decision and your chest opens up even. Though you're scared, that's information. The problem is we've been trained to override these signals. We think our way out of what our body is trying to tell us. We rationalize the stomach clench as anxiety we need to push through. We dismiss the chest opening as naive optimism we should be more careful about. But here's what changed everything for Maya, and this is where things get really interesting. The same day she found that journal, she started noticing things. On the subway, a woman was talking on her phone, practically yelling, and Maya caught this one phrase: "If you don't choose your story, someone else chooses it for you." She'd never seen this woman before in her life. The comment wasn't directed at her, but it hit like a punch to the gut. That afternoon, a co-worker randomly left a book on her desk with a note saying it had helped her through a tough time. Maya opened it, and the first sentence she read was about how imagination isn't just daydreaming. It's the actual mechanism through which we create our experience. Then later that week, she overheard a conversation in a coffee shop about someone quitting their stable job to pursue something meaningful, and the exact phrase she caught was, "The world doesn't change when you fight it. It changes when you change your state." Now, you could absolutely explain all of this away. Confirmation bias, right? Once you're thinking about something, you start seeing it everywhere. Your brain is just filtering for what's already on your mind. And sure, that's part of it. But there's something else happening here that's way more profound, and it's what I call the field response. When something shifts inside you, when an internal door cracks open even slightly, reality starts speaking back. Some people call it synchronicity. Some call it the universe responding. Some call it the quantum field reorganizing around your new frequency. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. This channel is for people who want real transformation, not surface-level positivity. Hit that subscribe button and you'll get more content that actually challenges you to evolve. Honestly, it doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is the pattern. When you're wrestling with a question, when something in you is ready to change, when you're standing at that threshold between who you've been and who you're becoming, the external world begins reflecting that transformation back to you through what seem like coincidences. The key is not dismissing them, not explaining them away as random chance, because when the same message shows up 3, 4, 5 times in completely unrelated contexts within a few days, something bigger is happening. This is where most people make a critical mistake, though. They start chasing signs. They turn synchronicity into superstition, looking for hidden meanings in everything, waiting for the universe to tell them what to do. But that's not how this works. The synchronicities aren't instructions, they're confirmations. They're mirrors showing you that your internal shift is real, that you're not making it up, that the transformation you're sensing is actually happening. Now, I want to go even deeper into this because what happens next is where people either break through or they get stuck repeating the same patterns forever, just with different faces and places. There's a moment in every awakening journey where you have to face something you've been avoiding. And it's not what you think. Write in the comments, "My body knows," if this is resonating with you right now. The thing you've been avoiding isn't some dramatic confrontation with your past or some hidden trauma you need to unearth. It's actually much more subtle and, honestly, more insidious. It's the beliefs you don't even know you have, the ones that have been running your life like background software since you were a kid, making decisions for you, filtering your reality, determining what's possible and what's not, all without you ever consciously choosing them. I call these nuclear beliefs because they're at the core of everything, generating massive amounts of energy that radiates out into every area of your life. And the crazy thing is, you can't see them directly. You can only see their effects. It's like trying to see the wind. You can't, but you can sure as hell see the trees bending. Here's how this plays out in real life. Let's say you grew up in a household where excitement was always followed by disappointment. Maybe your parents promised things they couldn't deliver, or good news always seemed to come with bad news right behind it. Your conscious mind might not even remember most of these instances, but somewhere deep down, your system learned a pattern. Hope is dangerous. Getting excited sets you up for pain. The safe thing to do is expect disappointment. So now, decades later, you're an adult trying to manifest a better life, doing affirmations, visualizing your goals. But there's this invisible force field around anything good. Every time something starts going well, you unconsciously find a way to sabotage it or brace for the other shoe to drop. You're not doing this on purpose. You're not weak or broken. You're just operating from a nuclear belief that was installed when you were too young to question it. If I let myself hope, I'll get hurt. Psychology calls these core schemas. They're the fundamental assumptions about yourself, other people, and how the world works that formed early and then became invisible. From a metaphysical perspective, they're like energetic contracts you signed without reading the fine print, and they keep renewing automatically until you consciously revoke them. And here's the kicker. These beliefs don't feel like beliefs. They feel like reality. They feel like just the way things are. This is why most manifestation techniques fail for people. They're trying to build a new reality on top of a foundation that's coded for the old one. It's like trying to run new software on an operating system that keeps rejecting it. You can visualize abundance all you want, but if deep down you believe you're inherently flawed or unworthy, or that good things don't last, your reality will keep confirming that belief, no matter how many vision boards you make. So what's the actual solution here? Because I'm not just going to leave you hanging with this revelation about invisible beliefs controlling your life. There's a practice that cuts through all of this, and it's deceptively simple. I say deceptively because simple doesn't mean easy, and it definitely doesn't mean comfortable. Every night you need to create a space of complete stillness. Not meditation in the traditional sense where you're trying to empty your mind, more like you're turning down the volume on all the mental chatter so you can actually hear what's underneath. You sit somewhere quiet, maybe dim the lights, and you just breathe until your nervous system stops treating everything like an emergency. This alone can take 10 or 15 minutes if you've been running on stress for years. Then, instead of analyzing your day or planning tomorrow or replaying conversations, you construct a scene in your mind. But here's what makes this different from regular visualization. You're not imagining yourself in the future having what you want. You're occupying the internal state of already being that person right now. You're not picturing yourself getting the promotion. You're feeling what it's like to be someone who naturally holds that level of responsibility and recognition. You're not fantasizing about the relationship. You're inhabiting the frequency of someone who is deeply loved and valued. This isn't daydreaming. This is identity reformation at the neurological and energetic level. You're training your attention to live in a less reactive state of consciousness. You're creating what psychologists call an emotionally corrective experience, a felt sense of safety and sufficiency that doesn't depend on your external circumstances changing first. And when you do this consistently, not just once or when you feel like it, but as a nightly practice, something profound starts to shift. The nuclear beliefs begin to surface because you're creating enough inner stability to actually look at them without collapsing. And once you see them, once you recognize that I'm not enough, or good things don't last, or I have to struggle to deserve love are just old programs, not truth. You can start consciously choosing something else, not by fighting the old belief, but by consistently occupying a state where it simply doesn't apply anymore. Drop a comment saying, "I'm ready to listen," if you're feeling this shift happening inside you right now. Something really fascinating starts happening when you commit to this practice, and most people don't notice it at first because it's so subtle. Your language begins to change. Not because you're trying to be more positive or you read some self-help book about reframing. It happens organically, almost like your mouth is catching up to an internal transformation that's already underway. You stop saying, "I have to," and start saying, "I choose to." Now, I know that sounds like one of those annoying semantic games that motivational speakers love, but stick with me because this is way deeper than word choice. When you say, "I have to go to work," "I have to deal with this person," "I have to fix this problem," you're unconsciously positioning yourself as a victim of your circumstances. Life becomes this heavy obligation, this series of tasks you're condemned to complete. Your body hears that language and responds accordingly. Shoulders slump, jaw tightens, breathing gets shallow. But when you catch yourself and shift to, "I choose to," even if you don't fully believe it yet, something changes in your physiology. I choose to go to work because I value financial stability. I choose to have this conversation because I respect myself enough to address it. Even I choose to rest today instead of forcing productivity. That shift from obligation to agency, from condemnation to choice, it literally changes how you carry yourself. Your posture straightens, your stride gets more confident. You start occupying space differently, like you have a right to be here, to take up room, to exist without apologizing for it. And here's what's wild. Other people notice this before you do. They can't necessarily name what's different, but they sense it. There's a frequency shift happening. Your nervous system is regulating itself, moving out of that constant low-grade survival mode and into a state where you're actually living, not just enduring. This is what people mean when they talk about raising your vibration, but it's not some woo-woo concept. It's measurable. It's the difference between a body that's chronically braced for threat and a body that feels safe enough to relax, expand, and engage with the world. Now, once you start noticing these shifts in your language and how you carry yourself, you need a reliable way to navigate decisions. Because here's the thing, your mind is going to keep trying to run the show. It's going to analyze every option, create pro and con lists, seek advice from 17 different people, research until you're paralyzed. And all of that can be useful, sure, but it's not where truth lives. Truth lives in your body, always has. Your body is the most sophisticated compass you have access to, and it's giving you data constantly. The problem is, we've been trained to ignore it, to override it, to intellectualize our way past what we're actually feeling. But when you're standing at a decision point, especially a significant one, your body knows before your mind has finished its third round of analysis. Here's how you use this. Next time you're facing a choice, doesn't matter if it's about a job, a relationship, a move, whatever, get yourself into a calm state first. You can't read your body's signals when you're already activated and stressed. Take a few deep breaths, let your nervous system settle, then think about option A and just notice what happens. Does your chest expand or contract? Does your breathing stay deep or does it get shallow and tight? Do you feel your shoulders relax or do they creep up toward your ears? Don't judge it, don't try to change it, just observe, then do. The same with option B, same process. Notice the physical response. And here's the crucial part. Trust the expansion even when it comes with fear. Because fear and contraction aren't the same thing. You might think about something that genuinely excites you, something aligned with your actual path, and feel fear because it's unknown, because it requires you to grow, because it challenges your current identity. But underneath that fear, if you pay attention, there's an opening. Your chest expands. Your breath deepens. There's a sense of, yes, this is alive, even though it's terrifying. Contraction is different. Contraction feels like shutdown, like your system is trying to make you smaller, trying to protect you by pulling you back. And sometimes that's valid. Sometimes your body is warning you about genuine danger. But more often, especially if you've been living in survival mode, contraction is just your old patterns trying to keep you safe by keeping you stuck. The analytical mind wants guarantees before it moves. It wants to know exactly how things will unfold, what the outcome will be, whether it's the right choice. But your body doesn't work that way. Your body speaks in sensation, in expansion and contraction, in the quality of your breath. And when you learn to read those signals, when you start trusting that felt sense over the endless mental negotiation, decision-making becomes so much clearer. This is where the real transformation happens, in the gap between what your mind thinks you should do and what your body knows is true. and learning to honor that gap, to privilege that embodied knowing over the intellectual gymnastics, that's when your life starts reflecting a completely different frequency back to you. Put "I'm learning to trust this" in the comments if you're recognizing how often you've ignored what your body was telling you. Here's what nobody warns you about. When you start this journey of listening to your body and shifting your internal state, things are going to come up. And I don't mean little things. I mean the stuff you've been successfully avoiding for years, maybe decades, is suddenly going to demand your attention. And your first instinct will be to think you're going backwards, that you're doing something wrong, that the awakening process is breaking you instead of healing you. But that's not what's happening. What's actually happening is your system finally feels safe enough to process what it couldn't before. Think about it. When you're in pure survival mode, when you're just trying to get through the day, your psyche doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with deep emotional wounds. So it files them away, buries them, builds walls around them, not because you're weak or broken, but because that's actually intelligent design. Your unconscious is protecting you from being overwhelmed. But now, as you develop this capacity to regulate yourself, as you build inner stability through practices like the nightly stillness work, your system starts thinking, okay, we might actually be able to handle looking at this now. And that's when the repressed material begins surfacing. Old grief you never fully felt. Rage you learned to swallow. Shame you've been carrying since childhood. It's not punishment. It's not evidence that you're failing. It's your psyche trying to become whole by bringing the unconscious into consciousness. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Dario, because his story illustrates this perfectly. Dario was known as the calm one, the guy who never got rattled, always reasonable, always measured. One day, a friend texted to cancel plans last minute. Nothing dramatic, just, "Hey, can't make it tonight, sorry." Dario read the message, typed back, "No worries," and then spent the next 3 hours in a spiral of rage that shocked him. He wasn't just annoyed, he was furious. He felt abandoned. His chest was tight, his thoughts were racing. He wanted to send increasingly passive-aggressive messages, even though he knew rationally this was completely disproportionate to what happened. And that's the key word, disproportionate. When your emotional response is way bigger than the situation warrants, that's not you being crazy. That's old material surfacing. The cancelled plan wasn't the real problem. It was a doorway. It triggered something much older, much deeper. For Dario, it connected directly to a childhood wound where being forgotten or deprioritized meant he wasn't valuable, wasn't worth remembering. As a kid, his coping strategy was to freeze, don't react, don't show you're hurt, don't make demands, just disappear into yourself where it's safe. If something here clicked for you, if you felt that shift happening while you were listening, let me know by hitting the like button. It's a small action that helps this message reach the people who need it most. That strategy worked for him as a child. It kept him protected in an environment where emotional expression felt dangerous. But as an adult, that same strategy had sealed off huge parts of his emotional life. He couldn't access his anger, couldn't recognize when boundaries were being crossed, couldn't feel the appropriate protective response when he was being treated poorly. Until that text message, suddenly, 30 years of unfelt anger about being made to feel invisible came pouring through, and his system didn't know what to do with it. This is what shadow work actually is. It's not some mystical practice where you commune with your dark side. It's the messy, uncomfortable process of meeting the parts of yourself you had to exile to survive, and learning to integrate them back into your wholeness. And anger, specifically, is one of the most misunderstood emotions in this process. We've been taught that anger is bad, that spiritual people don't get angry, that if you're really evolved, you'll transcend such low-vibration feelings. But anger is protective. Intelligence. It's your system's way of saying a boundary has been crossed, or this isn't acceptable, or I matter and this situation is not reflecting that truth. When you can't feel your anger, When you've learned to suppress it so thoroughly that you don't even recognize it anymore, you lose access to a crucial guidance system. You end up in situations where you're being mistreated, and you can't understand why you feel depleted and resentful, but you can't name what's wrong. The work isn't to get rid of anger. The work is to feel it consciously, to let it show you where your boundaries need to be, to use its energy for clarity and appropriate action instead of letting it leak out in passive aggression or sudden explosions. And that requires being willing to sit with the discomfort of emotions you've been taught are unacceptable, trusting that they're not going to destroy you, that you can actually handle feeling them fully. Drop "I'm ready to feel" in the comments if you're recognizing emotions you've been pushing down for way too long. So what do you actually do when these emotions surface? Because most people either try to push them back down, which just makes them stronger, or they get completely overwhelmed and act them out in ways they regret later. But there's a third option that sounds almost too simple to work, and yet it's one of the most powerful tools I've ever encountered. You name it, out loud. You look at yourself in the mirror, or you sit in your car, or you stand in your living room, and you say the thing you're feeling. I am angry. I am hurt. I am terrified. Not as a confession of weakness, not as something you need to fix immediately, just as a fact. This is what's present right now. What happens when you verbalize an emotion like this is fascinating from a neurological perspective. The act of putting language to effect, of naming what you're feeling, activates different parts of your brain. It moves the experience from the purely reactive emotional centers into areas that can process and integrate. Basically, you're taking something that was about to discharge automatically through snapping at someone, through shutting down, through compulsive behavior, and you're creating a moment of conscious recognition instead. This isn't about getting rid of the emotion. That's the mistake most emotional management techniques make. They're trying to make you feel better, to move you out of the uncomfortable feeling as quickly as possible. But this practice is about something deeper. It's about recognizing emotions as phenomena in consciousness, not as your identity. You are not your anger. You are the awareness that notices anger is present. That distinction changes everything. When Dario finally did this, when he stopped trying to rationalize away his rage and just looked at himself and said, "I am furious, I feel abandoned," something shifted. The emotion didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling him. He could feel it without becoming it, and from that place of conscious recognition, he could start to see where it was really coming from, what old wound was asking to be witnessed and healed. But here's where it gets even more interesting. And this is the part that actually restructures your reality at the deepest level. Once you can name what you're feeling, once you can sit with these emotions without being destroyed by them, you gain access to something incredibly powerful. The ability to consciously renounce the beliefs that have been generating these patterns your entire life. Think about it. You've been operating under certain assumptions about yourself and the world for so long that they don't even feel like beliefs anymore. They feel like truth. I'm not a priority. Good things don't last. I have to work twice as hard to deserve half as much. If I let people in, they'll hurt me. These aren't just thoughts you think occasionally. They're the foundational frequency you're broadcasting. And your reality has been organizing itself around them for years. The quantum field, the universe, whatever you want to call the organizing principle of reality, doesn't respond to what you consciously want. It responds to what you unconsciously believe you are. So you can visualize and affirm all day long, but if the core frequency you're vibrating at is, "I'm not worthy," guess what your life is going to keep reflecting back to you? Situations that confirm you're not worthy. But you have the power to change this, and it's not through fighting these beliefs or trying to convince yourself they're not true. It's through an act of sovereignty. You take those beliefs and you write them down. You see them in black and white instead of letting them live as this ambient background noise, and then you consciously, deliberately renounce them. Not because someone else told you to, not because you read it in a book, but because you are choosing to stop vibrating in that frequency. This is what people mean when they talk about breaking generational patterns or rewriting your story. You're not waiting for the world to prove you wrong. You're not collecting evidence that contradicts the old belief. You're deciding from a place of sovereign authority over your own consciousness that you are no longer available for that frequency. And when you make that decision and you hold it, not just once, but as a practice, your reality has no choice but to reorganize around the new frequency. It's like you've been playing a song on repeat your entire life, and suddenly you change the station. At first, the old song might try to come back. Your system is so used to it that it keeps wanting to default back. But if you keep choosing the new frequency, keep reinforcing it through your internal practice and your external choices, eventually the new song becomes your baseline, and everything in your life shifts to match it. Right, I'm changing the frequency if you're ready to consciously renounce what's been running in the background for too long. There's this bizarre moment that happens in the middle of transformation, and it's one of the most disorienting experiences you'll go through. Your external life might look exactly the same. Same job, same apartment, same relationships, same routines. Nothing has objectively changed. But internally, you feel like you're suffocating. What used to feel comfortable, maybe even safe, now feels like a cage that's gotten too small. And the confusing part is that the cage isn't bad. It's not abusive or terrible. It's just not big enough anymore. This is the threshold I'm talking about. It's not that your life changed first and now you're trying to catch up. It's that your internal scale shifted. You expanded on the inside, and now the external container of your life doesn't fit. You go to work and feel like you're playing a role that someone else wrote. You sit in conversations that used to be fine, and now you're almost itching to leave because they feel so surface level. You look around at the structure you've built and think, this is a good life, so why do I feel like I'm dying? People will tell you to be grateful. They'll point out how much worse things could be. They'll say you're being ungrateful or going through a phase. And part of you will believe them because you can't exactly point to what's wrong. There's no villain, no crisis, no clear problem to solve. There's just this growing dissonance between who you're becoming and the life you're living. And that dissonance is actually the signal that your identity is evolving beyond its current container. The mistake most people make at this point is they try to force themselves back into the old shape. They tell themselves to stop being so dramatic, to make it work, to appreciate what they have. And they can usually succeed at this for a while, but it costs them. It costs them vitality. It costs them that spark of aliveness. They learn to function in the too small space, but they do it by making themselves smaller. And there's something in you that knows, even if you can't articulate it, that making yourself smaller to fit is not the answer. What you're actually being called to do is step through the threshold, to acknowledge that you've outgrown this version of your life, not because you're selfish or broken, but because you're evolving. And evolution requires expansion. It requires leaving behind what no longer serves, even when what you're leaving behind isn't bad, especially when it isn't bad, because that's when it's hardest to justify the departure. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because the threshold isn't just philosophical. It requires a very specific kind of action, and it's not what you think. There was this guy, Esteban, who was stuck at this exact point. He knew he needed to move forward, knew the life he was living wasn't aligned anymore, but he was waiting for a sign clear enough, waiting for permission from someone, waiting for circumstances to be perfect, waiting for the fear to go away, just waiting. One night he did something that seemed almost childish, but turned out to be profound. He stood at the threshold of his front door, literally at the doorway of his apartment, and he said out loud, "I enter as someone who has already chosen." Not, "I'm thinking about choosing," not, "maybe someday I'll choose." He spoke as if the choice was already made, as if the new version of Himself was already real, already here. And something clicked in that moment, because he wasn't asking for permission anymore, not from the universe, not from his family, not from his own fear. He was assuming his right to exist fully, to move forward, to occupy the life that was calling him. And that shift from asking to assuming, that's where everything changes. See, most of us have been conditioned to wait for external validation before we make moves. We need our parents to approve, our friends to understand, our partners to support, our bank account to be at a certain number, our credentials to be perfect. We've outsourced our authority to everyone and everything except ourselves. And we think this is humility or wisdom, but really it's just a very sophisticated form of hiding. The moment you stop asking, am I allowed to want this, to be this, to choose this, and you start operating from, this is who I am and what I'm choosing, period, your entire energetic signature changes. You're no longer vibrating at the frequency of someone seeking permission. You're vibrating at the frequency of someone who has claimed their sovereignty. And the world, reality, the quantum field, whatever you want to call it, it responds to that completely differently. Put "I'm claiming this" in the comments if you're done waiting for permission that's never coming. But here's what most people get wrong about this whole claiming your power thing. They think it means making huge, dramatic declarations and then everything magically falls into place. They think the decision itself is about the external choice: take the job or don't, stay in the relationship or leave, move to a new city or stay put. And yeah, those are decisions you have to make. But that's not actually where the transformation happens. The real decision, the one that changes everything, is about which state of being you're choosing to occupy. Let me break this down, because it's subtle, but absolutely critical. There was a woman named Irene who got offered a job that looked perfect on paper. More money, better title, prestigious company. Everyone around her was congratulating her before she'd even decided, and when she sat with it, really sat with it without all the external noise, she felt her stomach contract, her chest got tight, her breath got shallow. Every physical indicator was saying no, but her mind was screaming about how stupid it would be to turn this down. She spent days wrestling with this, trying to logic her way into the yes that everyone expected. But finally she realized the decision wasn't actually take this job or don't take this job. The decision was, do I honor what my body is telling me, or do I override it for external validation? It was, do I assume the state of someone who trusts their internal compass, or do I stay in the state of someone who needs outside approval to make choices? When she declined that offer, she wasn't just saying no to a position. She was assuming the identity of someone who honors their inner truth over what looks good to others. And that's a completely different frequency. That's operating from sovereignty instead of compliance, from trust instead of fear, from internal authority instead of external validation. And once you make a decision from that place, once you choose your state of being over the external outcome, everything starts reorganizing around that new frequency. This is what people miss about manifestation. They think it's about getting stuff. The job, the relationship, the money, the house. But those things are just reflections. What you're actually doing is choosing what state you're going to inhabit, and then your reality mirrors that back to you. Irene's no to that job opened up space for something that actually aligned with who she was becoming. Not immediately, not dramatically, but consistently. Opportunities started showing up that she wouldn't have even noticed before because she was vibrating at a different frequency. Now here's the part that trips people up and makes them quit before the transformation can complete. They think this new identity, this new frequency, has to be executed perfectly. They make one decision from their truth, feel amazing about it, and then 2 days later they backslide into an old pattern and they think, see, I knew this wouldn't work. I'm not actually changing. I'm a fraud. But that's not how neural pathways work. That's not how energetic Rewiring works. Your new identity doesn't require flawless execution. It requires coherence. It requires that more often than not, your outer actions align with your inner state. Every single time you choose to act from your truth, even if you do it imperfectly, even if you stumble through it, you're strengthening the pathway. You're proving to your nervous system that this new way of being is safe, is real, is sustainable. Think of it like this. You're not trying to become a completely different person overnight. You're integrating a new frequency, and integration happens through repetition, not perfection. The old patterns are going to show up. Your conditioning doesn't just disappear because you had one powerful realization. But each time you notice the old pattern and choose differently, even if that choice is messy, you're building the new neural and energetic architecture. Maybe you set a boundary and your delivery isn't smooth. Maybe you honor your truth, but your voice shakes while you do it. Maybe you choose yourself, but you feel guilty for 3 days afterward. That's all part of the process. The coherence is in the choosing, not in how gracefully you execute it. And your system is learning, recalibrating, slowly trusting that this new way of operating isn't going to get you destroyed. What you're doing, whether you realize it or not, is teaching your body and your energy field a completely new baseline. And that baseline isn't, "I'm perfect and enlightened." It's, "I'm aligned with my truth, and I'm willing to honor that even when it's uncomfortable." That's the frequency that changes your reality, not the perfection, the coherence. Type coherence over perfection. If you're recognizing that your transformation doesn't have to look flawless to be real, the coherence thing becomes especially important when you start dealing with one of the sneakiest saboteurs in this whole transformation process, and that's guilt. Not all guilt, though. There's a type of guilt that's actually healthy and appropriate. It shows up when you've genuinely harmed someone, when you've acted out of alignment with your values, and it motivates you to repair and do better. That kind of guilt is useful. It's your conscience functioning properly. But then there's this other type of guilt that shows up constantly for people who are trying to change, and it's absolutely toxic. It's the guilt that appears when you rest, when you say no, when you prioritize yourself, when you set a boundary, when you stop being endlessly available. This guilt masquerades as your moral compass, but it's actually programming. It's conditioning that's designed to keep you small, manageable, and available for everyone else's needs. Here's how you can tell the difference. Healthy guilt shows up after you've actually done something that violated your integrity. Toxic guilt shows up when you're finally starting to honor yourself. If you feel guilty because you snapped at someone unfairly, that's legitimate. Repair it. But if you feel guilty because you took a nap instead of answering texts, because you declined an invitation you didn't want to accept, because you chose your peace over someone else's convenience, that's not your conscience. That's a control mechanism that was installed in you, probably when you were young, teaching you that your worth is tied to your usefulness. And this toxic guilt is a vibrational anchor. It literally keeps you stuck in a frequency of obligation and depletion. You can do all the manifestation work you want, but if every time you try to expand, guilt pulls you back into servitude, you're never going to sustain a higher state. The quantum field is going to keep reflecting back situations where you're overextended, undervalued, and resentful, because that's the frequency guilt keeps you locked into. Learning to recognize toxic guilt and consciously choosing not to obey it is one of the most radical acts of self-liberation you can do. And it's going to feel wrong at first because you've been trained to listen to that voice, to let it dictate your choices. But when you start distinguishing between, "I genuinely harmed someone and need to make it right," versus, "I'm choosing myself and my conditioning is freaking out," you can begin to dismantle that anchor. What's underneath the guilt, almost always, is shame. And shame is even more insidious because it's not about what you did. It's about who you are. Guilt says, "I did something bad." Shame says, "I am bad." And if you've been carrying shame, especially the kind that formed early when you were too young to question it, it affects everything. It affects how you show up in relationships, how you pursue opportunities, how you speak about yourself, how you move through the world. Most people with deep shame can't even look at themselves in the mirror for more than a few seconds without either criticizing what they see or looking away entirely. There's this profound discomfort with being fully witnessed, even by yourself. And that discomfort is your system trying to protect you from feeling the shame fully, because shame feels like annihilation. It feels like if you really look at it, if you really see yourself, you'll confirm what you secretly fear, that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. But here's the hidden truth behind that fear. The practice of actually looking at yourself in the mirror, meeting your own gaze without attacking or fleeing, without immediately jumping to what needs to be fixed or changed, is one of the most healing things you can do, because what you're teaching your nervous system in that moment is that you can be seen without collapsing, that being witnessed even by yourself is not dangerous, that you don't have to hide. Each time you do this, even if it's just for 30 seconds, even if it feels awkward and you want to make a joke or look away, you're repairing the internal field. You're sending a message to the deepest parts of yourself that says, you're not too much, you're not fundamentally flawed, you don't need to stay hidden to be acceptable. And over time, as you build that capacity to hold your own gaze with presence instead of judgment, something shifts in how you relate to everything. You stop living like you have something to prove or something to hide. You start existing from a place of basic okayness. Write, I see myself in the comments if you're ready to stop hiding from your own reflection. This practice of seeing yourself without judgment opens up something else that most people find deeply uncomfortable to acknowledge, and that's envy. We've been taught that envy is this ugly, shameful emotion that spiritual people shouldn't feel. That if you're really evolved, you're just happy for everyone else's success without any twinge of wanting it for yourself. But that's complete nonsense, and it keeps you from accessing one of the most valuable pieces of information your psyche can give you. When you feel genuine envy towards someone, not the passive, oh, that's nice for them, but the visceral, chest-tightening, can't-look-away kind of envy, you're not actually seeing their life. You're seeing a state you're refusing to permit yourself. You're seeing a version of existence that some part of you deeply wants, but has decided is off limits. And that decision, that internal prohibition, is almost always unconscious. You don't remember making it. You probably made it when you were young and didn't have language for what was happening. Here's how you can use envy instead of drowning in it. When you notice that sharp feeling of, why them and not me, don't try to spiritually bypass it with gratitude practices or positive thinking. Actually let yourself feel it, and then get curious. What specifically are you envious of? Not the surface stuff, not their car or their followers or their relationship status. What state are they occupying that you want? Is it freedom? Is it visibility? Is it creative expression? Is it ease? Is it the audacity to take up space without apologizing? Once you identify the state, ask yourself the real question, and it's not why them. The real question is, what part of me has been waiting for permission to embody this? Because I guarantee you, if you feel high confidence envy towards someone, meaning it's not just a fleeting moment but a persistent pull, it's pointing directly at dormant gifts and suppressed desires that are ready to come online. Your envy is a map of your potential. It's showing you exactly where you need to give yourself permission to expand. The reason you haven't given yourself that permission yet is usually because somewhere along the line you learned that expressing that particular quality wasn't safe. Maybe you tried to be visible as a kid and got shut down. Maybe you expressed joy freely and got mocked. Maybe you showed your creative work and got criticized. So you developed a strategy to stay safe, and that strategy became a character you play, a role you adopted so thoroughly that you forgot it's a role. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because these characters, these survival personas, are running most people's lives without them even realizing it. You know the ones I'm talking about. The strong one who never admits they're struggling because vulnerability felt dangerous growing up. The helper who's always available for everyone else because being needed was the only way to feel valued. The easygoing one who never makes waves because conflict meant abandonment or violence in their family system. These personas served you. They genuinely protected you in environments that felt unpredictable or unsafe. If showing emotion got you punished, becoming the strong one made sense. If your parents were overwhelmed and you had to parent yourself or your siblings, becoming the helper was adaptive. If speaking up meant getting hurt, becoming the easygoing one kept you under the radar. There's nothing wrong with having developed these strategies. You survived, that's what matters. But here's the problem. What once protected you now imprisons you. Because you're not in that unsafe environment anymore. You're an adult with agency and resources and the ability to choose differently. But the character is still running the show, still making decisions based on a threat assessment from 20 or 30 years ago. And every time you try to step into something more authentic, something more aligned with who you actually are, that character panics and pulls you back into the familiar pattern. The awakening process, the real transformation, requires that you recognize these characters, thank them sincerely for keeping you safe, and then gently retire them. Not violently, not with self-judgment, but with the understanding that you don't need them anymore, that you can handle vulnerability without collapsing, that you can prioritize yourself without being selfish, that you can express disagreement without being destroyed. Your nervous system doesn't believe this yet, which is why the characters keep activating. But each time you choose authenticity over the survival strategy, you prove it a little more. Type, I see the character if you're recognizing the role you've been playing and you're ready to step out of it. Retiring these protective characters brings you face to face with a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And that's the question of purpose. But here's where everyone gets it wrong. They're waiting for some cosmic download, some moment of absolute clarity where the heavens open and a voice announces, this is what you're meant to do. They're treating purpose like it's hidden somewhere, and they just need to find it, like it's a treasure buried in the ground, and if they dig in enough places, they'll eventually hit it. But that's not how purpose works. Purpose isn't this static thing waiting to be discovered. It's something you sustain through action. There was this guy, Andres, who spent years searching for his purpose, reading books, taking courses, doing personality tests, trying to decode what he was meant to do. And the whole time he was searching, he was also volunteering at a community center, teaching kids how to code. He didn't think much of it because it wasn't this grand, prestigious thing. It was just something he did because it felt good, because the kids lit up when they figured something out, because he was naturally good at breaking down complex concepts. One day someone asked him why he kept doing it if it wasn't his real career, and he paused. Because in that moment, he realized he felt more alive in those 2 hours a week than he did in his entire corporate job. There was this rumble in his chest, this sense of rightness, when his skills met a genuine need. That was it. That was the signal. Not a lightning bolt, not a dramatic revelation, just a consistent feeling of aliveness when he was doing something that mattered. The shift for Andres wasn't about finding his purpose. It was about moving from when I'm ready, when I'm more qualified, when the timing is right, to I choose this direction now and I'll figure it out as I go. And that choice, that commitment to move toward what made him feel alive instead of waiting for perfect clarity, that's what revealed his path. Purpose doesn't announce itself to people who are standing still, waiting for instructions. It reveals itself to people who are moving, who are taking action, aligned with what resonates, even when they don't have the full picture yet. But here's what nobody tells you about actually stepping into your purpose, about moving toward the thing that makes you feel alive. It can be absolutely terrifying, and not in the way you'd expect. Most people think they're scared of failure, scared of not being good enough, scared of trying and falling flat. And sure, that fear exists, but there's another fear that's way more paralyzing, and that's the fear of actually succeeding. Think about it. If you succeed, if you actually become the person you're capable of being, you have to sustain that. You have to live at that level. You become more visible, which means more people see you, which means more vulnerability, more exposure, more risk of criticism and judgment. You can't hide anymore. You can't play small. You have to show up as the full version of yourself, consistently. And for a lot of people, that feels like standing naked in a spotlight. If you grew up in an environment where standing out was dangerous, where being seen meant being targeted, where success or visibility brought punishment or jealousy or abandonment, your nervous system learned that expansion equals threat. So now, even though you consciously want success, even though you're working toward it, the moment you get close to actually achieving it, your system freaks out. You self-sabotage. You pick fights. You get sick. You create drama. Anything to pull you back down to a size that feels safer. The work here isn't about building more confidence or pushing through the fear. It's about teaching your body at a somatic level that expansion is not the same as danger, that being visible doesn't mean you'll be destroyed, that you can occupy more space, have more impact, be more successful, and still be safe. And you teach your body this not through affirmations or positive thinking, but through graduated exposure, small steps into visibility that don't trigger complete system shutdown. Micro-commitments that prove you can sustain a slightly bigger version of yourself without catastrophe. Right expansion is safe if you're recognizing how deeply your system has been protecting you from your own potential. Teaching your body that expansion is safe is one thing, but there's another layer to this that trips people up constantly, and it has to do with how you respond to the signs and synchronicities that show up. Remember earlier when we talked about reality speaking back to you when your internal state shifts? Well, here's the part that most people completely miss. Those synchronicities mean absolutely nothing if you don't respond to them. You can receive 100 signs pointing you in a specific direction, but if you just collect them like spiritual trophies without actually moving, you're training yourself to stay stuck. You're teaching your system that guidance is interesting but not actionable, that confirmation is nice but not compelling enough to generate change. And the universe or the quantum field or whatever organizing principle you believe in, it doesn't need to speak louder. You need to stop requiring absolute certainty before you act. Irene, the woman who turned down that job offer, started noticing this pattern in her life. She'd get these clear nudges, a conversation that sparked something, an opportunity that appeared out of nowhere, a book that fell off a shelf at exactly the right moment. And every time she'd acknowledge it, maybe journal about it, think, wow, that's interesting. And then, nothing. She'd wait for more confirmation, more certainty, a clearer sign. Ironically, by waiting for the signs to become undeniable, she was ignoring them entirely. The breakthrough came when she realized that the space between receiving a signal and taking action is where everything is decided. That gap is where your new identity either forms or your old one gets reinforced. If you receive guidance and you move on it, even imperfectly, even with trembling hands, you're embodying the version of yourself who trusts, who acts, who doesn't need guarantees. But if you receive guidance and you file it away for when the time is right, you're staying in the identity of someone who waits, who needs permission, who won't move without certainty. And reality mirrors that right back to you by giving you more situations where you're waiting, more circumstances where you feel stuck. This connects directly to something that completely revolutionized how I understood manifestation, and it's about the quantum field. Stay with me because this is where the mystical and the practical converge in a way that actually makes sense. Most manifestation teaching tells you to want something really intensely, to desire it with your whole being, to obsess over it, to visualize it constantly. And people do this. They create vision boards and repeat affirmations and feel the desire burning in them. And then they wonder why nothing changes. Here's why. Your desires don't manifest because you want them intensely. They manifest when you assume the state of already being the person who has them. There's a massive difference between those two things. When you're in the energy of wanting, of desiring, you're broadcasting a frequency of lack. You're saying, I don't have this, I need this, I'm incomplete without this. And the field, which is just responding to whatever frequency you're consistently putting out, gives you more experiences of not having it, of needing it, of being incomplete. There was this guy, Samuel, who spent 2 years trying to manifest a successful business. He did all the things, affirmations, visualization, mood boards, the whole toolkit. And he kept telling himself, I am ready, I am successful, I am a thriving entrepreneur. But underneath those words, his actual state was not yet. He was vibrating at the frequency of someday when I'm more prepared, when I have more resources, when the conditions are right. His words said one thing, but his energy said something completely different. And guess what the field responded to? Not the words. The sustained frequency. The shift happened when he stopped affirming what he wanted to be and started actually occupying that state. Instead of saying, I will be successful, he asked himself, how would someone who is already successful show up today? And then he did that. Not perfectly, not with all the external trappings, but with the internal posture. He made decisions from that place. He carried himself differently. He stopped apologizing for his prices. He stopped seeking validation. He assumed the identity, and his reality had no choice but to reorganize around it. Drop I assume the state in the comments if you're catching the difference between wanting something and being the person who has it. This whole process of assuming the state and trusting the signals brings up something that confuses people more than almost anything else. And that's what happens when you feel like you're doing everything right, but suddenly it seems like all guidance has gone silent. You're practicing, you're aligned, you're moving on the synchronicities, and then nothing. Radio silence. The signs stop coming. The clarity you had disappears. And you start wondering if you did something wrong, if you're being abandoned, if the whole thing was just in your head to begin with. But here's what's actually happening in those moments of seeming silence. Your guides, your higher self, the wisdom you've been accessing, whatever you want to call it, it's not gone. It's withdrawn the noise so you can finally hear your own center. Think about it. If you're constantly getting external confirmation, constant signs, constant reassurance, you never develop the capacity to trust yourself. You become dependent on the guidance instead of embodied in your own knowing. The silence isn't abandonment. It's actually the deepest form of guidance, even though it feels like the opposite. It's saying, you're ready now to make this choice without me telling you it's right. You're ready to trust the rumble in your chest without needing 3 synchronicities to confirm it. You're ready to stand in your own authority. And that's terrifying because you've gotten used to the external validation, the cosmic nods of approval. But the whole point of awakening is to come home to yourself, not to trade one form of external authority for another. When you can sit in that silence without panicking, without immediately seeking another sign or reading or person to tell you what to do, when you can just be with your own knowing, even though it's uncertain and uncomfortable, that's when you've actually integrated the transformation. You're not performing spirituality anymore. You're living from your center. Now, I want to go even deeper into this because there's a massive misconception about when and how this transformation actually solidifies, and it's not where you think. People imagine that their identity shift happens during these peak moments. The dramatic decision, the big conversation, the moment they finally set the boundary or quit the job or leave the relationship. And yeah, those moments matter. They're visible markers. But that's not where the actual identity construction happens. Your transformation happens on boring Tuesday afternoon when nobody's watching. It happens when you're tired and you could easily default to the old pattern, but you choose coherence instead. There was this woman, Patricia, who was working on becoming someone who honors her body's needs instead of constantly overriding them for productivity. She'd been doing the work, having the insights, setting intentions. But the real moment that changed everything wasn't some dramatic declaration. It was a random weeknight when she was tempted to stay up late scrolling even though she was exhausted, and instead she put the phone down and went to bed. That's it. Super mundane, not Instagram-worthy, not the kind of thing you tell people about as evidence of your transformation, but that single choice, made when it would have been so easy to do the opposite, that was identity construction. That was her nervous system learning, oh, we actually follow through on this now. This isn't just a nice idea. This is who we are. Every small choice you make is either reinforcing who you were or building who you're becoming. The coffee you drink or don't drink. The conversation you engage in or walk away from. The extra hour of work when your body is asking for rest. The scroll session when you said you'd meditate. These aren't trivial decisions. These are the actual architecture of your identity. The big moments just reveal who you've already become through 1,000 tiny choices nobody saw. Type the mundane matters. If you're realizing transformation isn't built in the highlights, it's built in the ordinary moments when you choose differently. This idea that transformation happens in the mundane connects to something that completely flips how most people think about purpose. We've already talked about how purpose isn't found. It's sustained through action. But there's another layer here that's even more profound. Your purpose isn't hiding somewhere in the future waiting to be discovered. It's actually buried in your past, in the things you loved doing before the world taught you to be practical. There was this guy, Matteo, who spent years trying to figure out what he was supposed to do with his life. He tried different careers, took aptitude tests, went to career counselors. Nothing clicked. One day he was visiting his childhood home and found a box of old report cards. Every single one had the same note from different teachers. Matteo is very bright, but he needs to stop explaining things to other students during class, and suddenly he remembered he used to love that, taking something complex and breaking it down so his friends could understand it, making connections between ideas, seeing people's faces light up when something finally made sense. That was it, that joy he felt at 8 years old, before anyone told him he needed to pick a real career, before he learned to ignore what naturally energized him in favor of what was supposed to be practical. That was his purpose. Not hidden. In the future. Remembered from before he learned to dismiss it. And once he saw it, once he gave himself permission to value what had always felt natural, his whole path became obvious. He's a teacher now, not in a traditional school, but creating educational content that makes complicated subjects accessible. He's doing at 40 what he loved at 8. Your purpose is almost always connected to what you loved before you were socialized out of it, before you were told to be realistic, to think about money, to choose something stable. If you want to find it, don't look forward into some imagined future. Look backward to what made you lose track of time as a kid. What did you do just because it felt good, not because anyone rewarded you for it? That's your North Star, not the job title or the status or the income potential, the feeling, the state you inhabited when you were doing that thing. But here's where people get stuck, even after they identify their purpose, even after they start moving toward it. They struggle with actually receiving the results. They struggle with letting good things land. And this is crucial because you can be perfectly aligned with your purpose, taking all the right actions, occupying the right state, and still block your own abundance if you don't know how to receive. Let me tell you about Valeria, because her pattern is so common it's almost universal. She was talented, worked hard, created value, but whenever someone complimented her work, she'd immediately deflect. Oh, it's not that good. I just got lucky. Anyone could have done it. When opportunities showed up, she'd minimize them or find reasons why she wasn't qualified. When money came in, she'd feel guilty about it, like she didn't really deserve it. She was vibrating in a frequency of unworthiness while simultaneously trying to manifest abundance. And those two frequencies cannot coexist. True abundance isn't about acquiring more stuff. It's about your capacity to receive what life is already offering you without guilt, without deflection, without immediately giving it away or minimizing it. Every time you brush off a compliment, every time you reject help because you should be able to do it yourself, every time you undercharge for your work because you feel uncomfortable asking for what it's worth, you're telling the universe, "I'm not ready for this. I can't hold this. Don't give me more." And the universe, or the quantum field, listens. It mirrors back exactly what you're broadcasting. If you're broadcasting, "I'm not worthy of receiving," it gives you experiences that reinforce that, not as punishment, but as reflection. The shift happens when you start practicing receiving without apology. When someone compliments you, you say, "Thank you," and let it land instead of deflecting. When an opportunity shows up, you say, "Yes, I receive this," instead of listing all the reasons you're not qualified. When money comes, you accept it with gratitude. Instead of guilt, put "I am worthy of receiving" in the comments if you're recognizing how much you've been blocking by deflecting what's trying to come to you. Learning to receive is absolutely critical, but there's another piece to this puzzle that most people completely misunderstand, and it has to do with the shadow work we talked about earlier. When most people hear shadow work, they immediately think about confronting their darkness, their rage, their shame, their jealousy, all the ugly stuff they've been trying to hide. And yeah, that's part of it. But your shadow isn't only the negative emotions you've repressed, it's also your brilliance, your power, your confidence, your radiance, all the things you learned to dim because they weren't safe to express. Remember Andres, the guy who discovered his purpose through teaching kids to code? When he started doing real shadow work, he realized his anger wasn't just this destructive force he needed to control. It was protecting his dignity. It was the part of him that knew when boundaries were being violated, when he was being undervalued, when he was tolerating what shouldn't be tolerated. His anger had intelligence, and his envy, that uncomfortable feeling when he saw other people confidently teaching and being recognized for it, that wasn't about being jealous of them. It was pointing directly at his own unexpressed desire to be visible, to teach at scale, to stop hiding his gifts. The work of integrating your shadow isn't about eliminating these energies. It's about harnessing them consciously. It's about recognizing that the rage you've been suppressing contains your boundary-setting power, that the shame you've been carrying is pointing to where you need self-compassion, that the envy is a map to your dormant potential, and that the brilliance you've been dimming because it made others uncomfortable is exactly what the world needs from you. When you start reclaiming these exiled parts of yourself, when you bring them into consciousness and use their energy, instead of being unconsciously controlled by them, your entire presence changes. You stop leaking energy through repression. You stop collapsing when these emotions surface. You become integrated, whole, powerful in a grounded way. And that frequency shift alone changes what your reality can reflect back to you. But integration, like everything else we've talked about, doesn't happen through one big cathartic moment. It happens through small, consistent choices that prove to your nervous system that you're actually changing. Your brain is incredibly simple in one specific way. It believes what you repeatedly do, not what you say you'll do, not what you think about doing. What you actually do, consistently, even in tiny ways. Every time you keep a micro-commitment to yourself, you're accumulating evidence. You're building a case that rewrites your self-concept from the ground up. Let's say you've identified as someone who procrastinates. That's not just a behavior, that's an identity. And as long as you see yourself that way, you'll keep creating situations that confirm it, because that's how the brain maintains coherence. But if you start making and keeping tiny commitments, walk for 20 minutes, send that message you've been avoiding, go to bed at the time you said you would, each one of those is a data point that contradicts the old identity. At first, your brain will dismiss them. That doesn't count. It was. Too small, anyone could do that? But if you keep stacking them day after day, your brain starts to notice a pattern, and patterns are what create beliefs. Eventually, you have enough evidence that you can't maintain the old story anymore. You've proven, through repeated action, that you're actually someone who follows through. And once that identity shift happens at the neurological level, the behavior becomes automatic. You're not fighting yourself to do the thing anymore. You're just being who you are. This is why the mundane matters so much. This is why the boring Tuesday choices are more important than the dramatic Sunday declarations. Because transformation isn't about who you are when you're motivated and inspired. It's about who you are when nobody's watching and it would be easier to default to the old pattern. That's where your new identity either gets built or your old one gets reinforced. Drop evidence is everything. If you're seeing how these small commitments are actually the foundation of who you're becoming, building this evidence through small commitments creates the foundation for one of the most liberating practices in this entire journey, and that's forgiveness. But not the way most people think about it. Most people hear forgiveness, and they think it means saying what happened was okay, or pretending you weren't hurt, or letting someone back into your life who caused harm. That's not what I'm talking about at all. Real forgiveness is about cutting the energetic cord that keeps you vibrating with your past. It's about reclaiming the energy you've been spending on resentment and redirecting it toward your actual life. There was this woman, Elena, who carried rage toward her father for decades. He was neglectful, emotionally absent, made promises he never kept. All of that was real. All of that happened. And she had every right to be angry. But here's what she finally realized. Holding on to that resentment wasn't hurting him. He probably didn't even think about it. The person it was destroying was her. Every time she replayed those childhood disappointments, every time she felt that familiar anger rise up, she was energetically still in that dynamic. She was still the little girl waiting for him to show up, still giving him power over her emotional state, still organizing her life around the wound he created. Forgiveness, for Elena, wasn't about calling him up and saying, "I forgive you," so he could feel better. It wasn't about reconciliation or pretending everything was fine. It was about saying to herself, "I'm done spending my energy on this. I'm cutting this cord. What happened, happened. But I'm choosing to stop reliving it." And the moment she made that decision, the moment she consciously reclaimed that energy, she felt physically lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight she didn't even know was there. This is what people don't understand about holding grudges and resentment. They think they're punishing the person who hurt them. But you're actually just keeping yourself locked in that frequency. You're vibrating at the level of the wound, and your reality keeps giving you situations that confirm that vibration. People who betray you, situations where you're not valued, dynamics where you're disappointed. It's all mirroring back the frequency you're stuck in. When you forgive, you're not doing it for them. You're doing it to free yourself, to redirect that massive amount of energy you've been using to maintain the resentment toward building the life you actually want. And the field responds to that shift immediately, because you're no longer broadcasting, "I'm a victim of my past." You're broadcasting, "I'm sovereign over my present." Now, one of the biggest blocks to forgiveness, one of the things that keeps people trapped in resentment, is toxic guilt. And this connects back to what we talked about earlier, but it goes even deeper. There was this guy, Tomas, who noticed a strange pattern. He felt guilty all the time, but not when he'd actually done something wrong. The guilt showed up when he prioritized himself, when he said no to a request, when he chose rest over productivity, when he spent money on something he wanted instead of needed. He started tracking it and realized the guilt wasn't his conscience, it was programming. In his family, love was conditional on self-sacrifice. Being good meant putting everyone else first. Taking care of your own needs was selfish. Boundaries were seen as rejection, so his nervous system learned that pleasing others equals safety, and prioritizing himself equals danger. The guilt wasn't protecting him from being a bad person. It was trying to keep him in a role that no longer served him. This kind of toxic guilt is an inherited frequency. It gets passed down through family systems, through cultures, through religions that equate self-care with selfishness. And it operates so invisibly that most people think it's just who they are, just their natural sensitivity or conscientiousness. But it's not. It's conditioning, and it's keeping you small. Write, "I release toxic guilt," if you're recognizing how much guilt you carry that has nothing to do with actual wrongdoing. Releasing toxic guilt is absolutely essential, but there's a consequence of doing that work that catches people completely off guard. When you start setting boundaries, when you stop people-pleasing, when you choose yourself over constant availability, people respond, and not always positively. Sometimes the relationships you thought were solid start to thin out. People get uncomfortable, they pull away, and your first instinct is to think you did something wrong, that you're being punished for your growth. This happened to Camilla. She spent months working on herself, learning to say no, recognizing her patterns, setting boundaries with people who'd been taking advantage of her availability for years. And then the invitations stopped coming. The texts slowed down. People she thought were close friends suddenly seemed distant. She felt abandoned, like the universe was punishing her for trying to change. She started questioning everything. Maybe she was being too rigid. Maybe she should just go back to being accommodating. Maybe growth wasn't worth losing everyone. But that's not what was happening. This wasn't regression. This was recalibration. When your frequency shifts, when you start vibrating at a different level, the people and situations that matched your old frequency can't stick anymore. They literally can't resonate with where you are now. And the quantum field, in its infinite intelligence, clears that space. Not to punish you. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because it needs room to reflect back relationships that actually match your new state. The solitude that comes after major internal shifts isn't punishment. It's a threshold. It's the in-between space where you're no longer who you were, but the external confirmation of who you're becoming hasn't arrived yet. And that space is uncomfortable as hell because your nervous system interprets it as rejection, as evidence that you made the wrong choice. But if you can sit in that discomfort without collapsing back into your old patterns just to fill the void, the field will stabilize at your new frequency and start attracting people who can actually meet you there. Most people can't tolerate this threshold. They feel the loneliness and they immediately backtrack. They lower their boundaries, they dim their light, they make themselves smaller again just to keep people around. And I get it. Solitude feels scary, especially if you've been conditioned to believe your worth comes from being needed. But if you can hold your ground, if you can trust that this clearing is happening for you, not to you, you'll notice that the people who show up after this recalibration period are completely different. They're not there because you're useful. They're there because you resonate. Now, while you're in that threshold space, you're also going to notice something else that's deeply uncomfortable. And that's the feeling of not fitting anywhere anymore. You go to gatherings with old friends, and the conversations feel hollow. You're in environments that used to feel normal, and now they feel suffocating. You can't relate to the complaints, the gossip, the surface-level small talk. And you might start wondering if something's wrong with you, if you've become judgmental or disconnected. But Paula discovered something crucial about this feeling of not fitting. It wasn't a flaw. It was evidence that her frequency had genuinely changed. When you no longer resonate with old environments, when you can't force yourself to engage with dynamics that feel misaligned, that discomfort is actually sacred. It's your internal compass pushing you toward your actual people, not just the convenient ones who happen to be nearby or who've been in your life out of habit. The transformation isn't complete when you've done all the internal work. It's complete when your external life reorganizes to match your internal state. And that reorganization requires letting go of what doesn't fit anymore, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it looks like loss. Because what's actually happening is you're making space for what's meant to be there. Type, I trust the clearing if you're in that threshold space right now and you're choosing to hold your new frequency instead of collapsing back into the old one. Trusting the clearing creates the internal stability you need to do something that will feel absolutely terrifying the first time you do it, and that's saying a real no. Not the passive-aggressive kind, not the "I guess so" that's actually a no, not the resentful yes. I'm talking about a clean, clear, unapologetic no that comes from your center, from your truth, without justification or over-explanation. There was this woman, Martina, whose sister had been relying on her for everything for years. Last-minute babysitting, emergency money, constant emotional support, crisis management. And Martina always said yes, because saying no felt like abandonment, like cruelty, like proof she was a bad person. Until one day her sister called with another crisis, another demand, disguised as a request, and Martina felt something shift in her body. Her chest didn't contract like usual. There was this clarity, this knowing, and she said, "No, I can't do that." Just those words. No elaborate excuse, no apology, no cushioning. And the silence on the other end felt like it lasted forever. Martina's nervous system was screaming that catastrophe was coming, that her sister would never speak to her again, that she'd destroyed the relationship, that she was selfish and terrible. But here's what actually happened. Her sister got upset for a few days, figured it out herself, and then called the following week. Like nothing happened. The apocalypse Martina had been terrified of her entire life never materialized. That first genuine no wasn't just a boundary. It was an initiation. It was the moment she stopped abandoning herself to maintain external peace. And what she discovered on the other side of that fear is that most of the catastrophes she'd been avoiding her whole life were invented by her conditioning, not based in reality. Her nervous system had been operating on threat assessments from childhood when saying no actually wasn't safe. But she wasn't a powerless child anymore. She was an adult with agency, and the no didn't destroy her. It liberated her. Once you cross that threshold, once you prove to yourself that you can set a boundary and survive, everything changes. You realize you've been negotiating with ghosts, avoiding disasters that only existed in your imagination, and suddenly you have access to a level of sovereignty you didn't know was possible. You can choose yourself without guilt. You can honor your truth without catastrophizing the consequences. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that stops most people right at the edge of their breakthrough. Once you've cleared the space, once you've set the boundaries, once you can hold your new frequency, you start getting these pulls toward things that absolutely terrify you. Not the comfortable growth, not the manageable next steps. I'm talking about desires so big, so visible, so exposing that every part of you wants to pretend you don't feel them. There was this guy, Bruno, who had this recurring fantasy about doing a TED Talk. Every time it crossed his mind, his stomach would drop. Public speaking terrified him. The thought of being that visible, that exposed, making claims in front of hundreds of people who could judge him, it felt like death. So he kept dismissing it. That's not for me. That's for people who are naturally confident. I'm not qualified. Who would even hear what I have to say? But the desire wouldn't leave him alone. It kept coming back, kept nagging at him, kept showing up in his dreams and his daydreams. And finally, he realized something. The terror he felt wasn't evidence he shouldn't do it. It was evidence it mattered deeply. The desires that make you tremble, that feel too big, that seem impossible. Those aren't ego traps trying to embarrass you. They're soul invitations toward your next level of expansion. Fear, when it shows up around a genuine desire, doesn't mean prohibition. It means significance. It means this thing matters so much to you that your nervous system is treating it like a survival threat, because succeeding at it would require you to become someone bigger than who you currently are. Put "fear means go" in the comments if you're recognizing a desire you've been dismissing because it scares you too much. Understanding that fear means significance changes everything about how you approach those desires. But there's another piece to this that's equally crucial, and it has to do with how the synchronicities we talked about earlier actually work. Because most people get this backwards. They think if they search hard enough for signs, if they're vigilant enough, if they're spiritually open enough, the synchronicities will appear and guide them. But that's not the mechanism. There was this woman, Mara, who spent months looking for signs about whether she should leave her corporate job and start her own practice. She was constantly asking the universe for confirmation, reading meaning into everything, desperately seeking validation for a decision she was too scared to make on her own. And the more she searched, the more confused she got, because she could find signs pointing in every direction. But then she stopped. She stopped searching for external confirmation and started working on internal coherence. She got clear on what she actually valued, not what she thought she should value, but what genuinely mattered to her. Freedom over security, meaning over status, impact over income. And once she had that clarity, once her internal state became coherent, once her daily actions started aligning with those stated values even before she'd made the big decision, the synchronicities exploded. Opportunities showed up that were perfectly aligned. Conversations happened with exactly the right people at exactly the right time. Resources appeared that she didn't even know she needed. But here's a thing. These weren't rewards for searching. They were reflections of her alignment. The universe doesn't respond to desperate seeking. It mirrors coherence. When who you are internally matches how you show up externally, when there's no contradiction between your values and your actions, reality organizes itself to support that frequency. This is why you can't fake it. You can't pretend to be aligned while internally you're still in conflict, still people-pleasing, still making choices from fear instead of truth. The field reads your actual state, not your stated intentions. And when those two things match, when you achieve genuine coherence, the synchronicities aren't something you have to search for. They become the natural language through which reality communicates with you. Now, achieving that coherence requires something we've touched on throughout this whole conversation, but needs to be made explicit, and that's understanding what integration actually means. Because there's this pervasive idea in spiritual circles that the goal is to transcend your shadow, to become purely positive, to eliminate the uncomfortable emotions and difficult aspects of yourself. And that's not just wrong. It's dangerous because it creates fragmentation instead of wholeness. Remember Andres, the guy who discovered his purpose through teaching. His real breakthrough didn't come from suppressing his anger or getting rid of his envy. It came from integrating them. When he stopped treating his anger like something shameful that needed to be eliminated and started seeing it as protective intelligence, it transformed into healthy boundary setting. He could feel when something wasn't right and actually do something about it, instead of swallowing it and pretending everything was fine. His envy, when he actually examined it instead of beating himself up for feeling it, revealed dormant ambitions he'd been too scared to admit. Other educators who were visible and successful weren't his enemies. They were showing him what was possible, what he secretly wanted for himself but hadn't given himself permission to pursue. The envy was a map, not a character flaw. Nothing gets eliminated in real transformation. Everything gets consciously directed. The anger becomes discernment and boundary setting. The fear becomes appropriate caution and careful planning. The sadness becomes depth and empathy. The envy becomes inspiration and direction. You're not trying to become some sanitized, perpetually positive version of yourself. You're becoming whole by reclaiming and integrating all the parts you exiled. Right, whole, not perfect. If you're understanding that the goal isn't elimination, it's integration of every part of you. Becoming whole through integration sounds beautiful in theory, but your body will tell you when you're not actually doing it. And this is something most people completely overlook because we've been so trained to live in our heads, to rationalize everything, to think our way through life. But your body is way smarter than your analytical mind, and it's speaking to you constantly in a language most people have forgotten how to understand. There was this guy, Julian, who kept having these physical symptoms that doctors couldn't explain. Chronic tension in his shoulders and neck, constant stomach knots, especially on Sunday nights. Jaw clenching so severe he was grinding through his teeth. He tried massage, physical therapy, medication. Nothing worked. Because nothing was physically wrong in the way Western medicine measures it. The problem wasn't in his muscles or his digestive system. The problem was that his body was translating truths his mind kept denying. His shoulders carried the weight of responsibilities he'd never actually agreed to. His stomach knew, on a visceral level, that his job was slowly killing his spirit, even though his mind kept rationalizing why he should stay. His jaw was literally holding back words he needed to say, boundaries he needed to set, truths he kept swallowing. The body doesn't lie. It can't. It translates your lived experience into sensation before your mind can spin stories about why things are fine when they're not. When Julian finally started paying attention to these signals, instead of trying to manage the symptoms, when he stopped negotiating with his body's clear messages and started actually listening, everything changed. The tension in his shoulders told him exactly which obligations to decline. The stomach knots showed him precisely which environments were toxic. The jaw clenching revealed every conversation he was avoiding. His body was his most honest counselor, speaking in sensations because he'd stopped trusting words. This is true for all of us. Your body is constantly giving you data about alignment and misalignment. When something feels expansive in your chest, when your breath deepens, when your shoulders drop, that's a yes. When something makes you contract, when your stomach tightens, when your jaw sets, that's information. And the more you honor these signals, the more you act on what your body knows instead of what your mind thinks you should do, the more your life reorganizes around truth instead of obligation. But here's where this connects to something we talked about earlier that deserves to go even deeper, and that's the whole concept of abundance and receiving. Because you can listen to your body, you can set boundaries, you can do all the internal work and still block abundance if you haven't addressed your capacity to actually receive what life is offering you. Valeria's transformation wasn't complete when she identified her purpose or when she started honoring her boundaries. It was complete when she stopped rejecting the good that was trying to come to her. She had this ingrained pattern of minimizing every compliment. Oh, it was nothing. I just got lucky. Anyone could have done it. When people offered help, she'd decline because she should be able to handle it herself. When money came in, she'd immediately find reasons to give it away or downplay it. When opportunities appeared, she'd list all the ways she wasn't qualified. She thought she was being humble, realistic, not getting ahead of herself. But what she was actually doing was vibrating in a frequency of unworthiness. She was telling the universe, the quantum field, reality itself, I can't hold this. I'm not ready for more. Don't give me abundance, because I'll just reject it anyway. And the field listened. It gave her just enough to survive, but never the overflow, never the ease, never the true abundance that was trying to reach her. Her breakthrough came when she started practicing something incredibly simple but profoundly difficult for her. When someone complimented her work, she said, "Thank you," and let it land. When help was offered, she accepted it without over-explaining why she needed it. When money came, she received it with gratitude, instead of guilt. When opportunities appeared, she said yes, before her mind could compile the list of why she wasn't ready. True abundance flows not to those who grasp hardest, who hustle endlessly, who prove their worth through suffering. It flows to those who've expanded their capacity to receive without contracting in guilt or unworthiness. Type, "I am learning to receive," if you're recognizing how much you've been blocking by deflecting what's been trying to reach you. Learning to receive is where everything we've talked about comes full circle, because this entire journey, from that first crack in reality, through the shadow work, the boundary setting, the identity reconstruction, the coherence building, All of it leads to this one fundamental shift. You stop living like you have to earn your place here. You stop performing for love. You stop negotiating with your own knowing. And you start existing from a place of basic okayness that doesn't require external validation to sustain itself. And when you reach that place, when you can finally receive without guilt, when you can hold your frequency without collapsing back into old patterns, when you trust your body over your conditioning, reality has no choice but to mirror that back to you. Not because you're special or chosen or doing everything perfectly, but because you've finally stopped blocking what was always trying to reach you. If you made it all the way here, if you stayed with me through this entire conversation, that's not an accident. Something in you recognized this message because you're ready for it. You're standing at that threshold, or maybe you're already through it and just needed confirmation that what you're experiencing is real. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment saying, "This message was meant for me, so I know you were here, so I know this resonated." And if you found value in this, if something shifted while you were listening, hit that like button. It helps this reach more people who need to hear it, and honestly, it tells me this work matters. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that now. Because this conversation doesn't end here. There's so much more to explore about transformation, about manifestation that actually works, about becoming whole instead of perfect. I'm creating content that goes deep, that respects your intelligence, that doesn't give you spiritual band-aids, but actual tools for genuine change. And speaking of going deeper, there's a video right here that picks up where this one left off. It's about what happens after you've done all this internal work, how to actually sustain your new frequency when the world tries to pull you back. Click it and continue with me over there. I'll see you in a second.